Okay, I have you covered with this outfit. Therefore, smarten your look with women's stroke ladies blazer jackets that come in different styles and colors that are created by you yourself. Okay. Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen from wherever you're watching from. Welcome back to Top Stitch Tailoring Studio. In today's video, as per this request, I'm going to share with you the easy way on how to draft this female blazer jacket using a step-by-step beginner method that I will be showing you. Just watch this video up to the end. So ladies and gentlemen, let us jump straight to our blazer jacket practical pattern drafting class. Okay, as usual, I first draw this horizontal line, which will be my neck and shoulder guideline, and this one vertical line, which will be my center back guideline. After, I pick the highest body measurement from my measurement table. Here I have hips that measure 38.75 inches plus 4 inches is allowance. Now from starting point A, I measure inwards half of hip measurements plus a half of is allowance. My hip measurements is 38.75 inches. I divide by 2, giving me 19.375 inches plus 2 inches is allowance. Now, my working area for both the back and the front will be 21.375 inches. So, I square these 21.375 inches down. Then, I square up a straight line to outline my working space. Ladies and gentlemen, this method is optional. You can start drafting your pattern direct on fabric, or you can do this to simplify your work pattern. As you can see, this is my working space. I go ahead and divide this working space into 2 to get the midpoint. So here is my midpoint of 21.375 inches. After, I square up a straight line, which will be the back and the front side seam lines. Next is to insert the other horizontal working lines for our blazer. From starting point A, I measure downwards. My blazer full length is 27 inches plus 0.5 inches length is giving me 27.5 inches. So, I mark my 27.5 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. Next is to insert my blazer hem allowance. From hemline, I mark downwards 1.5 inches hem allowance. Also, I square across a straight line. After, I now determine my chest line or under arm line. From starting point A, I measure downwards chest measurement divided by 4. My chest measurement in this tutorial is 36 inches divided by 4, giving me 9 inches. So, I mark 9 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. Also, I have to determine the waistline. From starting point A, I measure downwards blazer coat full length divided by 2 to get the midpoint. Then, from this midpoint, I mark downwards 2.5 inches for the waistline, or you can say belly line. After, I square across a straight line like this. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, all the 5 horizontal working lines that are needed for our bladder project are ready. Next is to input my other measurements to these lines. As per coats and jacket character, we always begin by drafting the back. It is the back that will guide us in drafting other panels. I begin by inserting the back neck. From starting point A, I measure inwards chest measurement divided by 12. My chest 36 divided by 12 giving me 3 inches. So I mark 3 inches here. After, I continue inserting shoulder to shoulder measurements. From starting point A, I measure inwards shoulder to shoulder measurements divided by 2 plus 0.5 inches for seam allowance. My shoulder to shoulder in this tutorial is 15 inches. I divide by 2 giving me 7.5 inches. So here is my 7.5 inches plus 0.5 inches giving me a total of 8 inches. So I mark 8 inches here. After, I come back to this neck with this point. I mark upwards 1 inch for back neck depth. Then I create a back neckline curve like this. Next is to slant my shoulders. I come to this point. I mark downwards 0.25 inches for shoulder drop. Then I connect this point to this point in this way to create shoulder slant line. After, I now insert across back arm line rise. At this point, I mark inwards 0.5 inches. I square these measurements to the chest line. Then, I square up a straight arm line rise. Next is to insert round chest measurements. From this point at the center back line, I measure inwards chest measurement divided by 4 plus is allowance. My chest is 36 divided by 4 giving me 9 inches. So here is my 9 inches plus 1 inch is allowance. Ladies and gentlemen, the intake or the amount of ease to be added to your outfit depends on the style you are working on. You can add more or less depending on how tight or loose you want your cloth to be. The choice is yours. But as for me in this tutorial, I don't want my cloth to be too tight. I don't want it to be too loose, so I have added ease allowance of 4 inches to my original measurements. When divided by 4 panels, giving me 1 inch. That means every panel is going to take 1 inch. Okay, we continue. I mark my 1 inch ease allowance here. After, I come to this arm line rise. I measure this distance divided by 2 to get the midpoint. So here is my midpoint. I now connect this shoulder drop point to this point and this midpoint to the chest line seam line in a curved way like this to create back armhole curve. Okay, we are done with the armhole area. Next step is to widen my back neck. As you all know, bladder coat is dressed on top of other clothes. So to give it a comfortable fit at the neck, I have to widen its neck slightly. Now, I come to this point. I mark inwards 0.5 inches along the shoulder drop line. Then from starting point A, I deepen my back neck depth by 0.25 inches. After, using my curved ruler, I connect these points together to create my new back neckline in this way. Now, this line ceases to be part of my working back lines. Next is to insert darts to this blazer coat. I come to the chest line, I measure inwards nipple to nipple measurements, divide by 2 plus 0.5 inch for seam allowance. The nipple to nipple measurements in this tutorial is 7.5 inches, divide by 2 giving me 3.75 inches plus 0.5 inches for seam allowances, giving me 4.25 inches. So I mark 4.25 inches here. Note, make sure that you always add seam allowances to your dart, because if you don't, after calculating without including seam allowance, by the time you finish stitching your darts together, it will have reduced to less by your original apex to apex measurement. So take note, always remember to add seam allowances so that you don't get dart shortage, fabric shortage when joining those darts together. So that's the launcher I've given you. We continue. After I square up a dart line like this, then I come to the chest line at this point. I mark downwards 0.5 inches for back dart point. Then I come to the waistline. At this dart line, I insert dart intake of 1 inch. So on this side, I mark 0.5 inches. Also, this side I mark 0.5 inches. Then I connect these dart points like this to create chest or waist dart legs. After I insert hip dart point, first I measure from this neck or shoulder line downwards to determine the position of my hip. My client's shoulder to the hip is 24 inches. So at this 24-inch point, I mark upwards 2 inches for the position of the hip dart point. After, I connect these points in this way to create my hip dart legs. We are done with the dart area. Next step is to insert the waist measurements. From this point at the waistline, I measure inwards waist measurement divided by 4 plus 1 inch dart allowance. My waist measurement is 32 inches. I divide by 4 giving me 8 inches. Here is my 8 inches. Plus 1 inch dart allowance giving me 9 inches. So I mark 9 inches here. Next, I insert hip measurements. At the hemline, from the center back line, I measure inwards hip measurements divided by 4 plus 1 inch is allowance. My hip measurement is 38.75 inches. I divide by 4 giving me 9.68 inches. So here is my 9.68 inches plus 1 inch is allowance. After, I connect these points together to create my back side seam lines. Note, I have not added seam allowances to the sides, so if you are following this method, make sure that while cutting on fabric, remember to add seam allowance of your choice to the sides and 0.5 inches to the shoulder slant line. As for the armhole, we already added during calculations. So here is our back pattern. It's almost ready. You can leave it like this, or you can design your blazer in panels or separate this in panels. As for me, in this tutorial, I'm going to design my blazer using princess dart lines. I come to this arm line rise at this point. I create my princess dart line like this. Ladies and gentlemen, we are done with the back part. For the back, you can cut on fabric while on fold or two separate pieces. The choice is based on the design you are creating. Okay, so far so good. Next, let us proceed to work on the front panel. For the front, this will be my center front line. So from this center front line, I measure inwards chest measurement divided by 12. My chest 36 divided by 12 giving me 3 inches. So I mark 3 inches here. Also from this point, I mark downwards 3.5 inches for front neck opening. After I square these points like this. Next is to insert my shoulder to shoulder measurements. From this front center line, I measure inwards. Shoulder is 15 inches. I divide by 2, giving me 7.5 inches plus 0.5 inch seam allowance, giving me 8 inches. So I mark 8 inches here. Then from this 8 inches point, I slant down my shoulders by 1.5 inches. After I connect this shoulder drop point to this neck with this point like this. Next is to determine across front arm line rise. From this point, I mark inwards 0.75 inches. I square this to the chest line. After I square up across front arm line rise. From this point, I measure upwards chest measurement 36 divided by 16 giving me 2.25 inches. So I mark 2.25 inches here. Also from this 2.25 inch point, I still mark upwards 2.25 inches here. Then I connect this point to this point like this. Next is to insert my chest measurements. From this center front line, I measure inwards chest measurement divided by 4. My chest measurement is 36 divided by 4 giving me 9 inches. So here is my 9 inches plus 1 inch for ease allowance. You remember for the back also we added ease allowance of 1 inch. So now even the front we are adding ease allowance on the chest line 1 inch. After I now connect this point to this arm line rise point to create front armhole curve. Guys, if you are enjoying these pattern drafting videos, please subscribe to this channel. And if there is any pattern that you want me to draft using your own measurements, please feel free, drop your comment or drop your request in the comment section down below. I would wish to read your comments and give you back the reply. Okay, we continue. I'm done with the armhole area. Next step is to widen my front neck with this. I come to my back pattern. I measure this distance from this shoulder drop point to my new neck with this point. Here I have 4.75 inches. So I come to the front at this point. I insert TOPTS measurements. I mark it here. So now at this point I create my front neckline curve in this way. Next is to insert the front dart. From the center front line, I measure inwards nipple to nipple measurements. For apex to apex is 7.5 inches. Divide by 2 giving me 3.75 inches plus 0.5 inch for the dart seam allowance. giving me 4.25 inches. So I mark 4.25 inches here. Then I square up a straight line to create my dart line. Next is to determine my apex or bust point. I measure from shoulder line downwards my apex or nipple position. Here my client's shoulder to nipple or bust line is 10 inches. Then at this nipple or bust point, I mark 1 inch downwards for the bust dart point. After, I now insert my dart intake of 1 inch. So at waistline, I mark 0.5 inches this side, also 0.5 inches this side. Then for the hip dart point, I copy the back hip dart point here. I have 5.75 inches, so I mark 5.75 inches here. After, I connect these points together to create both waist and hip dart legs in this way. Next is to insert the waist measurements. I copy the waist measurements of the back. I mark here. Also, I copy back hip measurements to the front hemline. After, I connect these points together to create front side seam lines. Next is to create my princess dart at the front. At this point, I connect to apex or nipple point. Then I blend it to dart point in this way. This is the center back panel. This one back side panel. This front side panel, and this is the center front panel. This you cut 2 pieces on fabric. Also this you cut 2 pieces on fabric. The back side panel also 2 pieces on fabric. Then for the center back you can cut 2 pieces on fabric, or you can cut your fabric while on fold. The choice is yours and it depends on the style that you are working on. After, the next step is to work on the lapel. I come to this point. I first prolong this line. After, at this widened neck point, I mark outwards 0.75 inches for the upper lapel break guideline. I first mark button extension of 1 inch. So from this center line, I mark 1 inch here. After, I square down a straight line like this. Still at this point, for the upper lapel break guideline, I measure downwards like this. Chest measurement divided by 3. My chest measurement is 36 divided by 3, giving me 12 inches. So where 12 inches touches the center front button line, that's where my lapel bottom break point will be. So I mark 12 inches here. After, I connect these points together to create a lapel break line. Then, from this cross section of lapel and neckline, I mark outwards lapel width is 3 inches. But you can mark more or less depending on how wide or small you want your lapel to be. So for me, I want this lapel to be slightly medium in size. So I mark 3 inches. Then, using my free hand, I create a curved outer lapel seam line connecting it to the lapel bottom breakpoint in this format. Next is to shape my blether from the bottom. I come at this point. I mark upwards diagonally 1.5 inches after I create a blether bottom shaped line like this. Still, I draw these lines continuous to touch the front button line in this way. Note, ladies and gentlemen, the way you connect this determines the buttons you want your blether to have. So, I will connect it leaving space for only one button placement. As you can see, my one button will be here. Okay. Wow. Wow, our blether coat is already showing shape. Okay. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our female blether practical drafting class. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give this video a thumbs up, share, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. That is it. Next is to trim out our blether pattern in this way. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I had for you. Thank you so much for watching all the way from where we began from. Hope you can now create your own basic female blether coat or jacket. Our next video will be the drafting of collar and sleeve for these blethers. Bye bye. I sign out. See you in my next video. God bless you all. Shalom. I sign out.